SvelteKit gives you a very powerful state model, but to make your app predictable, you need to know which state belongs where. Today we're going to take a look at that to make that more clear. Now, we're going to start with a few things. First, in the previous video, and I really recommend you watch that, I left the code with a little bug. Maybe not a little, but a bug nonetheless. We're going to start fixing that, and that's related to state. Then you're going to talk about how to avoid shared state in the server. Take a look at pure load functions, look at data in the URL search params, and finally, we're going to take a look at snapshots. So first, let's take a look at the app here. If you're new to this series, what I'm building is a travel journal app where you can log your trips and add entries and delete those entries. It's a very simple app. I'm using Drizzle with SQLite in the backend, and that's pretty much it. So in the previous video, we started manipulating entries or creating new entries and deleting entries. And one of the things that I did is to create a new entry. So let me go here to Rio de Janeiro, but you can also see the error right now. It's talking about Italy. And if I switch again to Greece, this here never changes. So this is the first problem and one related to state that we're going to solve. And it all boils down to this line of code here. I'm getting the entries that are being returned from the load function, whatever is being returned from this function here. And I'm storing in a state rune here. But the problem is this line of code here only runs once when the page component first mounts. So if data.entries has changed, we are never updating the entries variable here. We're just keeping the state of whatever we changed in the page. I did this in order to be able to optimistically update this array. So in here, I'm updating entries whenever a new entry is deleted immediately before waiting for the server response. And the same thing here when deleting an entry. I'm removing it in memory before waiting for the server response. Now, this works fine. This solution worked well when manipulating in a single page. If I reload the page, I know that I have no entries in here. If I add a new entry, one, and this is a test, I'm going to save this. It immediately displays in here, and I can delete it, and immediately it removes from the page. And this is great. It's responding in memory, and it's great usability. But the problem is I forgot to handle the fact that what SvelteKit does is executes this code only once. And if you need reactive state, if you need a data to derive from the backend or from the data.entries, I need to either derive this, or because I am manipulating this locally and keeping state, I need to watch for effects. Whenever the data from the server changes, I need to update entries here. If I just do that and type this correctly, now if I come back to the page and I navigate between the different trips, I can see that this is from south coast of Iceland and then New Zealand and so on and so forth. Now, this is updating as the data updates. I'm looking at the data.entries, and when this changes, and SvelteKit does this automatically just because we are making a reference to data.entries. So whenever data.entries changes, we are updating entries with the newly changed data. And we also keeping this in state, so we can manipulate this locally, as we can see here. If I try to add an entry again, so let's try entry number 2 or 3 and test. There you go, it still works. And I'm going to navigate back and forth one more time just for good measure, and there it is. One other concept that is very common when we're doing client-side work, just using, for instance, this Svelte library or any other client-side library, is that any shared global state, it's only impacting you, the user on the browser at that moment. It's not impacting other people in other browsers. That changes when you have state in the server. So sometimes when you're not used to do the backend part of the application and SvelteKit provides both, you might be tempted to do something that is going to be sort of dangerous, but definitely not correct. So let's take a look at this here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the server first and add a new file called visitcounter.ts. And I'm going to copy in some code. What this code is doing is keeping a module variable visit counts. This visit count is shared across your server. Every time we try to increment a visit counter, we're going to look for the trip ID and add to this map if it doesn't exist and increment the number of visits. Now in the load function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve this Let me just remove the comments and import the dependency here. And I need to return this to the markup. To be visual, we're going to add that markup here right after the title. There you go. If I look at this page right now, I'm going to reload once and I have one visit to Rio de Janeiro. If I switch to another page, it's a different ID, one visit to. If I come back to Rio de Janeiro, I have two visits here. Okay. If I open a new browser tab and I visit that page, that same page, I started with 3. That's fine if the goal was to have a global counter. I'm not persisting this anywhere, but at least if the idea is I have a global counter of visits to that page, then that will be fine. But assuming that this is a journal and this is private and somewhere down the line I have authentication to see only my own trips, that's not the thing that I want, right? Now, you could say that this implementation was way too naive, and I would not disagree with you because I'm not keeping track of the user ID. And I could, in theory, store this in a database instead of in memory and keep track of the user ID. That would be fine. But there's a second issue with this. Before I go to the second issue, let me just recap. The first issue is having a variable like this shared in memory with all of your users. It's not dedicated to just a single one, and that's something that if you're only used to writing code that runs in the browser, you may not realize this. Global variables are shared across the whole server and across all users. Now, going back to the second part, which is, let's say we want to store this in a database and we're going to keep track of the user. I'm not going to implement that, but I'm going to show you the second problem that we have. So let me show you this in a different way here, what the problem this could be. I'm here on Banff. It's my first visit to this page. And if I delete an entry here, nothing happens in the visit count, but I'm going to reload the page. Yes, because I reloaded the page, I'm at the second visit. Let me go back to the code and show you how this can be a problem. In the previous video of this series, while talking about form actions, and to make this optimistically updated, I created an enhance function to handle the delete, and when updating the page state, I passed an optional parameter here said invalidate all false. What this does is it tells SvelteKit that this page should not invalidate all of its data, and thus it should not call the load function once again. If I don't have this optional parameter here, let's see what it's going to happen. And I'm going to open my network tab here just to make this very clear. I'm going to delete an entry. And you can see that on top of deleting the entry, so we don't have the entry number 19 anymore, it also requested more data in here. And what this means is it triggered another visit because we call the load function here. The load function is calling increment visit counter, which increments the visit counts. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if your load is causing side effects, you may not intend for it to cause side effects every single time that the load is executed. And you either have to control every single time that the load is executed, which can be very cumbersome and a lot of work, or your page is going to be unreliable, which means values are going to change or side effects are going to happen when you not intend them to happen. So be very mindful of when you do this kind of side effect within your load. If you can, avoid doing that and try to do that intentionally through action calls. Now I'm going to remove this from the code here. I don't need this anymore. And in the page here, we don't have that anymore. All right. Now the next thing that I want to talk about is something that is very common, which is using search params, right? And we do have this here within the pages. Now, when I navigate, we can set the page number to a search param, and this could very well be a search term. So if I wanted to, I don't know, search for, I don't have anything to search implemented here, but search for routine in the title or in the text, this could be anything in the search param. This is very common. This is another state. The mindset here that I want to emphasize is that whenever you have data that could be persistent in your URL, it's safe to be shared. And you want to use that whenever the page loads, store that in the URL params. It's pretty simple as that. And in your code, when the load function is being called, you'll have access to that through the URL, and you can get url.searchparams. I talked about this in 2 other videos, both when we're talking about loading data and in the router. If you're interested in knowing more, take a look at those videos. The main thing that I want to share in this one here is that if you have any sort of data that needs to be persisted across requests, and it's safe to do so in a public manner, do that in the URL. That's the mindset for this kind of state. There's one more piece of state that I want to share with you, and I think it's very handy for complex scenario. We don't have a complex scenario here, but we can simulate that. What I'm going to do here is, when creating a new page, let me copy some code here. This is the creating a new trip default action. And before, all we had is the destination. Now I added 2 more fields just to simulate a little bit of complexity in this form. I need to come here to my script and add some code, and I'm exporting a const snapshot here, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But before doing that, I'm going to update my form to have a couple more fields. So we do have destination, and it's now bound to the state variable here. And we have a start and end date here and a start date. That's pretty much it. I'm going to just quickly comment this export const and demonstrate the default behavior, which is when you come to this form here and try to create a new trip, say I'm going to Montreal, as it's saying here. If I leave this page and I come back, I lost that information. Imagine that this is a more complex form, right? So it has more fields. With just 3 fields, it might not be that much of a problem, but let's say that we have a more complex form here. So Snapshot, what it does is it gives you this ability of start typing something here and leave to another page, come back, and that value is still in there. Let's also select a date here. Let's say that I did this and I accidentally clicked here and now I come back. Both fields are filled. This is very easy to implement. All we need to do is export a snapshot object that has a capture and a restore. Capture, as the name implies, captures the current state of whatever value you wanna save in this snapshot, and restore will actually restore the value into the state so you don't lose that. So you can imagine that this can be very, very handy. I hope this helped clarify the mindset of where to store state using SvelteKit. Personally, for me, Snapshot was something new, and it's a very cool feature, and also something that I got tricked by a few times is how SvelteKit first render page components and maintain states across the navigation of those pages. So I hope this helped you clarify that and you learned something today. Thank you, and see you in the next one.